This game is fascinating because Firouzja played a kind of noteboom variation, but with the white pieces instead of the black pieces, and he got a very interesting and dynamic position after just 12 moves. So it was played against Sergei Karjakin. This is the new In Chess Classic 2021. Let's have a look at what happened here, and if you love a daily chess video, do hit that subscribe button to never miss one. So it started out with this collie system, characterised by the fact that the bishop is left at home. It doesn't come to f4 like we see in the London systems. We now had the immediate c5 from Sergei Karjakin, and you can go pawn to c3 here, pawn to b3, many systems, but Firouzja takes here. And this starts to set up a really interesting line, so e6, pawn to b4 is his idea. And after pawn to a5, undermining the structure there, he goes pawn c3, we have captures here, and now pawn to b6, it looks like the white position is crumbling. But here's the follow-up. So we had bishop b5 check. That one was blocked. We had this exchange here like this, and now simply castles from Firouzja. And what he's got planned is that after the pawn captures here, we don't recapture, that would be bad. Instead, we push on, and we're creating these two connected passed pawns on the queen side, just like we see for black with colours reversed. Bishop to d6 now, pawn to a4, castles from black, bishop to b2, and now the queen goes to b8, showing good understanding of the position here. So the queen didn't come to c7, for example, because this bishop often bounces round like this, blockades these pawns, so it gives it some room there. Now we had knight b to d2 and rook to c8, again showing good positional understanding. This is black's passed pawn, of course, so the rook sits nicely behind that passed pawn, and it also prepares ideas of later pushing e5, and then if white goes e4, you're ready to meet c4 supported by the rook. So we had queen c2 now, and arguably better was queen b1 here actually, not stepping into the line of the rook. But okay, and now black could go e5 immediately, but instead goes pawn to h6. Just some micro improvement of the position there. Firouzja brings his other rook into the game behind his passed pawns. And now e5 from black, so setting up that big centre. Now there's a threat here to go pawn to e4, kick the knight, and then pick up on h2 with check, because we've got this battery here, of course. So white has to respond. Now if you go e4 yourself, this is what I was mentioning. c4 is a powerful response. Black is fully equalising here. You have to take this pawn, and then black has a couple options. c3 is possible immediately, or you can just retake here, and you've got a decent game, good piece activity for your minors. So that's why Firouzja didn't go e4. Instead, he went pawn to g3 here, covering that threat. Now black could go e4 right now, although then the knight comes into h4. Different game, white's doing fine. Instead, bishop c7 was played, but this is inaccurate because you block your rook here, and now it gives Firouzja this opportunity to go pawn to e4, and he pounces immediately. And the trouble now is you can't go pawn to c4, or we're simply taking here on d5. The variation's very different. Say you capture here, well now actually you can just take this c4 pawn. There's no tactics here, the rook is blocked, white's doing very well. So that was the big problem with bishop to c7, because now when e4 came, d4 was forced, and look at this hole that you've now created on c4. Positionally, this is now really bad for black already. So the knight immediately hops in and occupies that c4 square. We had bishop to a5, and it might look strange to try and give up your bishop like this now, but when that knight is so powerful, black is happy to do this. So if Firouzja doesn't chop, he plays bishop c1. He's preparing to chop off those dark squared bishops. Queen b7 was played, attacking this pawn, and Firouzja goes bishop to d2, so there's a threat to take here twice, so you don't have time to pick up on e4. If you capture here, then we come like this and we cover the pawn. So instead black retreated that bishop, and now pawn b6 came, and that can't be taken because there's too many tactics with the rook lined up on the queen, so the bishop had to drop again. And you can see how miserable the black position is getting now, confined to those back three ranks. So we had rook e1 covering the pawn, rook to a6, pawn to a5, and these ones are really powering down the board now. Problems for black. Rook to e8 was played. Now knight to h4, looking here. You can't go g6, so you're dropping this pawn. We had rook to e6 instead. The knight came to f5. Pawn to h5 was played, preparing g6 without hanging the pawn. Queen to d3. So just nice subtle improvements of the position. Firouzja now looks at the rook, keeps the queen tied down. We had pawn to g6. And now you could jump in with check actually. The tactics are working okay. But why start calculating all of that, possibly getting your knight trapped, when you can simply hop back and keep all of your pressure? And this knight is actually going on a very nice journey into g5 here. So rook to a8 was played, lots of shuffling you'll see from black in this game. Knight to f3, queen to a6, knight to g5. So the rook dropped back from that attack. And now the queen came to b3, stepping away from this pin behind the knight. Whoops. Now we had knight to e8 from black, so preparing to bring a piece to d6, freeing this square for the other knight. Rook a to b1 was played, so Firouzja's actually preparing a queen exchange here. He could have pushed f4 there, started something on the king side, but he just wants to keep control in this position, squeeze Sergei. So now we had knight d to f6, the queen came to b5, and here we see this exchange I was talking about. But it doesn't solve the black problems because still these pawns are passed and menacing, and these ones are actually looking quite weak as well. So knight to d7 was played, rook to c1, starting to eye this pawn. We had knight to d6, and here Firouzja swaps that monster knight on c4, but he does still keep his advantages with the passed pawns and the weak black pawns. Now knight to f3 was played, and this is a really nice remaneuver. We know where that knight wants to be. We also now free up this square for the bishop. So pawn to f5 was played. Sergei tries to get some counterplay going. We had bishop g5, the rook moved away, and now knight d2 covers this square, looks here just in time. King to f7 was played. The knight came to c4, no time to take here or we pick up your bishop and it's check. So we had king to e6, pawn to f3 holds the pawn in the middle, rook to a6 now, and now Firouzja starts using his other trump in the position, not just the pressure in the centre, but the passed pawns. So pawn to b7, he finally pushes there. We had rook to f8 now, Sergei goes for counterplay rather than passively sitting in front of the pawn. We had king to g2, bishop to b8, rook c to b1, and now Sergei just keeps shuffling. He can barely do a thing, so he jumps into c7 with the bishop. And now how do you actually break through? Well, you have to do something, and here Firouzja finds a really nice remaneuver of his bishop. So bishop c1 was played, and he's coming around here to target this pawn. So bishop to b8 and bishop to a3 completes that journey. The bishop came to a7 now to protect that c5 pawn. We had rook to e1, and again just a beautiful switch using both sides of the board, and now there's threats to take here and open the e-file. So g5 was played in a desperate attempt for counterplay, but now Firouzja simply took on f5, the king recaptured, and now how do you think Firouzja finished the game? If you want to pause here and look for the best move, please do so. So he played knight takes on e5, awesome stuff. This knight wasn't taken, but if it was, then the follow-up is bishop takes on c5. And the rook is attacked here, as we can see. So is this bishop. Then you uncover these threats along the 5th rank. So black would have to chop this bishop off, the rook would recapture, and this knight is soon dropping. If rook e8, then rook c8 comes. That's the point. Now you're going to be making a queen or losing the rook. Too many threats. So Sergei didn't take the knight. Instead, he played rook e8 immediately, but now the knight took on d7, leaving a whole rook, because after the rook took here, Firouzja captured with the bishop here. Again, there's just way too many problems with the exposed king, and here Sergei actually resigned. If you want to see Firouzja crushing Donchenko in the noteboom variation, then click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.